Welcome everyone to the seventh in our series of 9 workshops entitled Navigating the Waters of Indigenous Art. It's been presented by the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre in partnership with the Niagara Catholic District School Board. Tansi, Brian Kahn, Natishikashan, Niagara Falls, Nowikan, Netanesco, Wakamakanak, Ilinawak, Mashkagewak, Ekwamiti. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Kahn. I live in Niagara Falls. My ancestors, they come from the far north. They are the Moose Cree, and I am Métis. Today, it's my pleasure to be introducing our featured artist, Jill Lunn. Jill was born and raised in Niagara, the Niagara-Hamilton area. She's the mother of 3 girls, ranging in age from school age through to post-university ages. And she's been educated herself in special education as well as recreational management. Jill has mostly been home instructed in many art mediums by her mother, the late but well-known artist Audrey Bernice Shimizu. Jill paints about a range of subjects, including intergenerational trauma, Aboriginal issues, and healing. While her favorite medium is acrylic on canvas, she alternates with other mediums such as multimedia collage, sculpture, and she's a fantastic photographer as well. And you'll get to see some of that work today. Several of Jill's original pieces hang in agencies throughout the Niagara region, including the St. Catharines General Hospital, Pathstone Mental Health, Contact Niagara, and the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center. A number of her pieces are also in private works throughout the Niagara region. Jill, along with her husband, Ryan, reside and raise their family in the town of Jordan Station, Ontario. And working from their home studios, they often paint and compose together and often collaborate with one another when creating paintings. And I find that fascinating that 2 artists can work off of a single canvas. Currently, Jill works with the Ryan Lunn Music and Consulting Company, which is about her husband's music. She's the lead consultant, and they are working very hard to train their children, all 3 of them, in not only art but also the music arts as well. And so it's an interesting dynamics that they have. Just some quick information before I bring Jill online. The way this is set up is that Jill is going to provide you some information about who she is, her art form, how she got to where she is today, what motivates her, what her passions are. She'll share some of her techniques and some of her images of paintings as well as photography. But the intent is for you as the workshop participants is to watch, listen, and observe. And then when the session is over, you'll have an opportunity for about 10 minutes to ask questions. So post your questions online and I will see them and I'll bring them to Jill at the end of the session. But your work actually starts after this goes off the air. So what we would like you to do is create something that's been modified or not modified, created based on what you hear from Jill today. So whatever inspires you, something that motivates you, that's the word I was looking for. Whatever motivates you. She's going to be talking about acrylic and paint on canvas, but if you don't have access to that, pencil crayons, felt markers, watercolors, oil-based paints, anything on paper, on canvas, whatever you have access to works. What we hope that you'll do is take a photograph of your completed work after this is done and send it into the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre. And it will be added to a virtual gallery that they're hosting. So it's your chance to become famous as well. So with that, I'm going to bring Jill online. Hi, Jill.
Hello, hi.
All right, so I've done your introduction. I'm going to jump off screen and the stage is all yours.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Jill. I've been looking forward to this class the most. I love youth. And today we're going to focus on the main subject, which is water. And we're going to be talking about how people can heal using art, meditation and prayer with music. And I'm going to share some technique with you. So if we can go to the slides. Oop, can you go to intro? Sorry.
Just 1 second, Jill, sorry.
No, it was me. Sorry about that. Okay, well, I'll just start talking. Okay, my name is Jill Shimizu. I go by the name Jill Lunn in music and art. Um, I'm Ojibwe, and my clan is Eagle, and my spirit name or my Indian name is Ginibkwe, and that means Golden Eagle Woman. That name was given to me by a healer and a pipe carrier, probably when I was around 16, 17 years old. I needed to get my name so I would understand what my journey would be in life. Um, I did take a lot of art in high school, and right up when I went to high school, there was like a grade 13, and so I took right through. Um, okay, start with the photos. Great. Okay, this is my art room. This is where I work. One of my studios in my house. This is the one I like the most, and you can just see the general. So when that's okay, yeah. So this is the Audrey Shimizu Foundation. My mother, who raised me, she was an artist. She's passed away, but she was an advocate for women in art. So when she passed away, we contributed to and created this foundation that women artists locally can access so they can receive money for showing their work, and it gives them a platform. Next slide. There's a couple of these, sorry. This is, yeah, this is the brochure for the art show and music show that Ryan and I do together. So it's you can see in the corner there, the square, that is the album cover. It is a 14-song album. You can get it for free online, really. It's to help people with mental health and help people navigate through addictions and healing. And then I have art and photography that slides in the back during that show. Next slide. This is a painting I did for my agent, and around the back you can see a lot of crackling. It is a dandelion because our agency is called Dandelions of Courage, and my agent is Wanda Ryan. Next slide. This is one of my paintings. This is the smallest one I've ever done. My paintings are really quite huge, and this one is about someone who's looking to heal. This one's on display at the St. Catharines General Hospital. Next slide. This is my biological mother. So when I was, I don't know, I think I might have been maybe 6 months old, I was apprehended, not legally, from my mother. And I was placed in the foster care system. And we were maybe in 7 foster homes before we were adopted. I met my mother again when I was 18. And by then she became a pastor. She was ordained, and she was a faith healer and a gospel singer. Next slide. This is me and my sister. We were adopted together, and we always were together. And she's now a registered nurse. And yeah, next slide. This is so when I was adopted, I was raised by this gentleman, and his name is Arthur Shimizu. He is a nephrologist and a professor of clinical medicine. He's now almost 100 years old, and I look after him. But he taught at Western, McMaster, and the Cleveland Clinic. He traveled the world when I was young. I didn't see a lot of him, but yeah, really smart guy. Next slide. So this is Audrey Shimizu. She is the artist in my life. She taught me the most about art with working with her, with listening to her, but a lot of watching what she did. And she was well known in her day in Hamilton and in women's art in Ontario, and she's been published in Canada also. Next slide. And that's us when we were little. So when I paint a lot about trauma or my own trauma or my own healing. It's Audrey, my mother was a very hardworking individual, but as a mother, she really wasn't the best mother. She was very angry. She was violent, and between my father, who told us that you don't want to be a Native person, you can pretend to be half Japanese, which is what he was, and we had spent a lot of time with my mother when my father was traveling. And it gave us a lot to work on in our youth and a lot to talk about now. Next slide. This is her artwork. So she could draw very, very well. This is a drawing of her, what she saw when she saw Wistman's Wood in England. And she went there because it was her dream to go and see the oldest forest in the world. Her favorite thing to paint and draw was trees. And this is one of her drawings. Next slide. This is my husband and I. We have a music company called Lunn Music and Consulting. We promote art and music, and my husband has, he does a lot of rock music, folk, and we do these called variety shows where when it's not COVID, we have a lot of novice and seasoned performers that will go through our shows, and we do those throughout the region. Next slide. So Ryan and I, we work together. This is one of our downstairs studios, and you can see him looking at a painting, and we'll probably come back to this image, or I'll talk about this image again. But so he'll be giving me feedback when he's writing. So at this time in this picture, this is when I was working on the series of paintings that went along with the album. And this is him talking about what he could see. And there's a cool video about how what was coming out in the image was kind of freaking him out. But anyways, next slide. Again, it's my upstairs studio, just some examples of what I do. I work a lot on the floor. I do have easels, but I really like to have my paints sink into some of the cracks that I make in my artwork. And you'll see this image again later when it's completed. Next slide. This is from my red dress series. So the red dress, of course, pays homage to the murdered and missing Indigenous women in Canada. But this particular is, so you can see how it's like a residential school uniform. So what I was trying to talk about was, where did those people go? When they came out of the residential school, what happened to them? And my picture suggesting that our people, a lot of the women with no other way, they went missing, and we have to care. Next slide. Okay, so before we get into too much of the art, I want to show you a couple of things. So when you see it later on in my artwork, I make a lot of cracks, and I fill cracks, and I'm going to show you how I do that beforehand. So I use this. Let me turn it so you can see it. So this is a really big bucket of it because I use a lot. You don't have to buy it that big. And then I'll put it on my canvas, and it cracks like this. And when I use a special paint that it seals it so that I can paint over and over and it doesn't fall off my canvas. And I also use a different kind of cracking, and it comes out like this. This makes smaller cracks, and I combine different techniques. And another one I use, you paint this way, and then you put it on a second layer on top. And then when you put a third layer, so it would be a different color, it cracks and it shows the under layer on top. And okay, so let me get a few tips here. So I guess I wanted to share a couple of things that I've learned along the way, because I'm really not, I don't draw very well. I have a lot of tricks and ways that I've adapted my art to accept my limitations. And so I'm going to go right to how I organize my art rooms. I'm not sure how many of you are seeking art as a way of life or as a career, but here's some ideas that I really live by. And the first thing is to organize your art hoard. You want to label everything, gather your supplies, and I'll just show you quick. So these are just some of the things. There's papers and glues and all kinds of things, but it's all properly labeled. If I don't label it, then I get confused. I put all my storage in different containers, but it's all on wheels. So when you saw that photograph of my studio, I like to work on the floor. There's a lot of open space, but everything I have. So I have paints that are, some of the towers are about this high. It's all on wheels, so I can move everything to one side if I have a big project I'm working on, or I pull it closer to my easel. Everything is within reach, but I can rearrange my room any way I want to. It all depends on my projects. So when you're buying paints, I work with acrylics. I do work with some oils. That's not my favorite. It's just not my favorite. Buy fewer paints, but the highest quality that you can afford to buy. The more expensive paints have more pigment in it. The cheaper ones have less pigment, so you have to keep going over and over. And if you have an image in your mind that you're trying to paint, then you're better to have really good paint, because it's going to turn out the way you see it in your mind. When you're using when you're trying different things, try some mediums. So pouring mediums, some crackling mediums, just try, and then you'll find like your own style. I use a lot of templates and stencils. So I'll shade with them. I use different kinds like this. It's got, sorry, I try and put it on my shirt. Textures. They don't really look like much when you see them, but when you you shade with them or you put them in the background, you can create forms by layering the stencils, and I do a lot of that. I organize them by type and by theme, everything being very organized, and I wash them all immediately after use, because then they last longer. When you're painting, don't ever rush. Always take your time. Don't ever feel like you have to finish a painting in one day. Some of my paintings have taken months. Some of them, like the one behind me, where is it? Oops. So that one there, I've only been working on that since last night. But the one next to it, that one I've been working on for a couple of weeks. It just depends where it comes from. If you're mixing paints, try and save the unused portions in little containers. I use little pill bottles, or I buy some from the dollar store, and then I can revisit and use those again. Take photos of your work so that you can prove that they're yours later, so no one can take your ideas. Or you'll see in this why I took pictures. So can we go to the slides, please? Okay, album covers. So this is how I choose to do my work, and this is how I plan to make my money. I make album covers for Ryan's album. So this is the 14 concept album. You'll get to see the painting of it later. This is how it looks. This is my most known image. Next slide. This is our new release, and I showed you on the floor how I was working on it. It's actually a big painting, and when you see it, it's only like really tiny, but that's how I do it. Next slide. And I use photography. So I'm also a photographer. This is layered, and it's grunged up, and I've added colors, but that's the old St. Catharines General door. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. Okay, I guess we're going to go through some photography. This is, just go ahead. This is a headshot. So I did this Ryan was performing, and the light was just perfect in such a way that when I clicked it, this is how it looked. And when I edit it, I just kind of darken it a bit and kind of pull up some of the refined areas, and we use this commercially. Next slide. This is one that's been dulled a bit. He's actually directing, I think, something in a play or something that he was doing. Next. I take pictures during live events. This is my friends protesting in Niagara Falls. Next slide. This is, I do a lot of live band photography and people performing, whether it's plays or, this is Newport Electric. Look them up. It's, they're a rock band, a roots rock band, probably my favorite band. Next slide. Everybody knows this downtown. You just black it out and add color specifically. Next slide. This is here because I wanted to talk to you about finding those things in life, those simple things that make you happy, but finding those beauty in those small things. And when I looked at this, I was like, wow, I just want to take a picture of that. And I did, and then edited it just to make it look kind of different. And this isn't in my art show, but just to be an example. Next slide. So you don't have to use a lot of really expensive equipment. Phones these days are as good as any digital camera we ever use. This is just from my camera or my phone at night. Leaned out of the car and snapped a picture. I wasn't driving. And with the iPhones now, it takes pictures that in low light. Just take pictures and express yourself. Next slide. This is a series I was doing about musicians and artists' hands. This is Gravely James, a friend of mine, and we promoted him quite a bit. He is, I think this year he won 3 Niagara Music Awards. He is very, very good. Look him up too. Next slide. This is Dusty McMillan. I like this because of his expression on his face. It's some in some bands, some of the people like the drummer, they tend to be back. So this I had an opportunity to get a really good shot of Dusty. Next slide. And I'll take some of those photographs of those small moments and I'll put them together, and these then become the event flyers, whatever they need it for auditions, or if they're applying for different gigs. This was a show that the two of them were doing together at Sessions on the River. Next slide. This is just a snapshot. So we we do have photographers that have studios where we do go and get our headshots done. This is one of my favorites. Just snapped it while he was sitting on the couch. Next slide. We take our kids to work quite a bit. Ryan and I were coordinating an event and doing photography, so we just brought our little baby. This is Molly. Loves her dad. Next slide. And this is Michelle Elise Burnett. She is a curator of Indigenous art and music. If you have an interest in it, look her up, the Celebration of Nations. She's a wonderful individual. I've known her my whole life. Her and I lived next door to each other growing up. And her mom really helped me a lot, her late mother. Next slide. So here are the supplies. I don't know if you want to take a look. I can go over that again if we have time. The pickling paints, I want to show you. This is how I seal the cracks. So you can, there. Some of the stuff is not like super cheap, but I gather things slowly. Okay, some more slides. All right, so we're going to talk about co-pilots. This is the album cover. It's started to look like this. You can see in the areas, the stencils. So I don't rely on them to make my forms, but I use them to create depth. And in the top right-hand corner, that is red. That's the part of the album where the person is having a really big struggle, or in the depth of their addiction. So that would be in the fall. Then we move to the winter. I use different stencils to create the snow and the twigs, and then the spring, and then the summer. Next slide. This is how it looked when it was finished. So you saw the little square. This is actually the size. It's really, really big. And this one is on display right now at the St. Catharines City Hall. Next slide. Again, how it looks when it's the album cover. You can see that Ryan is in the middle, and this tells his story, his healing story, and the dandelion in the corner. You don't see it so much here, but in the painting, the dandelion seeds are flying away. Those were the loss of those wishes and dreams, but they do come back. Next slide. When I'm creating, sometimes it takes a long time. And in this, when Ryan approached me to do his album cover, I didn't know him very well at the time. And I had to go through a lot of his photographs and putting them together, what he was thinking he wanted it to be morphed or combined. Next slide. Hours and hours of printing and manipulating photographs. Next slide. This is actually the one that we use. So we were meeting with one of our agents at the time, and he was tuning a mandolin for me to play. I'm a violinist and a pianist, and I don't play the guitar, but the mandolin I can play because it has the same tuning as a violin. And just what you end up with, you never really know. When you take pictures, I take a lot and never know when they're going to come in handy. Next slide. Okay, so this next series of pictures, it's about a picture that hangs at Pasto Mental Health. It's about my history, my trauma, and it's going to talk about how we can create water. Okay, first slide. I didn't start documenting it, but when I did, this was where it was at. You can see the outlines of things. At the top, that is a big wave. And that wave was how memories come to you when you're dealing with things inside. You have waves of memories, waves of emotion, and those waves bring tears. And those tears are water and they clean, they help you. So next slide. This is how it progressed. There's a lot of dripping, which I use. You can see the stencils in there. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like now. So if you see it at Pastone, this is how it looks, the completed painting. We're going to see some parts a little closer. Next slide. So this is what I was really focusing on, because at the time I was processing some things in the way I was raised. And this, so when during the time when I was being abused, I looked in the eyes of my abuser, and this is how I was able to document that. So using crackling things, I put on a layer of that, the two-step we talked about. So there's a layer of yellow, and then I put another layer, so it's a clear medium on top. And when that dried, it cracked. And in the cracks, I then put different paints in those cracks. And to me, the most important part of this painting was the eyes. Next slide. I also used crackling in the lips. I think the next slide shows it a little bit closer. Yeah. So you can layer the cracks. You can use different mediums. This painting probably has like 3 or 4 different types of mediums that I use to create the cracking and the 3D effects. Next slide. This is the water. The swirling, I think the next slide shows a little bit closer. Yeah. So you can force paint into the cracks, and then when you look at, you can see the white parts of those cracks. So sometimes I use diaper wipes just to wipe it off the top. And that's why it's important to seal it so that you don't lose that 3D effect. But in planning your painting using these techniques, it's good to like have an idea possibly before you start where you want that 3D thing on your canvas, or not at all. I have some where I just put the 3D on and just went for it. But in this, I had planned the waves. Next slide. Yeah, again, you can see it. There's different kinds of paints in there. This part doesn't have any stencils, but it does have different layers. So to layer in this way, it's important to take your time and let the paint cure. And when the paint cures, when you're wiping and as you're layering, it doesn't come off or mix. Sometimes I'm worried about that. I'll even spray with a sealer, and then I'll work on top of that and keep working on top of that. I couldn't tell you how many layers are in this picture. It's just, it goes on and on. Next slide. This shows that not all of the painting has a medium on it. You can see the canvas through it. Next slide. All right, so the history, let's go ahead and have a look at it. This is, it's again, pretty large. The middle is my father who raised me was, he is Japanese, and this is his family crest. So when the samurais went out, they used their family crest. This is his, and around the outside is the medicine wheel of my people. So this is the two of us coming together with our two histories. Next slide. That's the only example that I had. My mother had that created in Japan, and it was, there's another copy, and it was sewn into his teaching jacket when he was teaching overseas. This is the blue part. Let's just stay here for a second, because I wanted to show how below there is a dark color. Then I put the crackling, the two-step crackling medium, and I painted over a light blue. And you can see the cracks using two different colors. And when you go back and you look at it, it looks really bright, but there is a significant meaning to me in using that. Next slide. And the stencils. So how you use your stencils, you can emphasize them or you can pull them back. And when you look at the dark part, I had darkened that part so it mellowed it out. And then in certain parts, I emphasized it. Next slide. And again, using, this is molding paste, and it's just a paste that it's kind of rough, and you can paint over top of that. This painting I had actually worked on 2 years ago, and I never finished it. And just recently, I just finished it. And you know, sometimes when you're working on something, it's not going the way you want it to go, just put it away and don't worry about it. Don't look for perfection. Just when you feel that moment, go ahead. Next slide. Oh, more supplies. Okay. I think the next one is my mother-in-law's painting, perhaps.
Just one sec, Carol.
So I was blessed with a wonderful mother-in-law, and I painted a picture for her. We'll get there. I'm not worried. Glad to have this moment because I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how art heals. And when I'm working in my art room, I have a lot of music blaring. To me, the music brings out that art and it brings out the tears and emotion. My cousin, I watched his segment a couple of nights ago, and when he felt that when you have a lot of emotion, you shouldn't paint. For me, I think it's a great way to get those feelings out in a constructive way. I don't keep all my paintings. Sometimes I'll literally burn them to end that part of my life and just move on. Okay, so this is going to show you a little bit of my process. I use tape. So I tape things out. I make some clear lines, and those are drippies. Again, we're moving on to how the trunk starts taking shape, different ways that I block out, so the colors behind and the colors in front. Next slide. I started using stencils to put some background textures, and I used tape to create the tree. Next slide. And this is how I use stencils. So this is a tiny little stencil. It's really not that big. And I use it over and over using different shades of the same color. And that creates the depth. And it makes it look like there's a lot of grass and flowers growing under the tree. Next slide. Just another emphasis. Next slide. Just how it's progressing, and again, using tape. So I use a lot of framing in my pictures. I don't actually put frames on the canvases, but I sometimes create them using tape. Next slide. And this is how it looked when it was finished. So in this, Ryan and I made this together, and that's his handwriting on the top. Don't try to rush things that take time or need time to grow. This was a statement about our relationship. And you can't really see it here, but sometimes I use glow-in-the-dark paints, and there's some of that in this photograph. So what have you got next, Sarah? What's the easiest? What's the easiest set of slides to go to for you? Mitch. Okay, So this set of slides is going to explain a little bit more about stenciling, creating depth, and this doesn't create any form at all. First slide. So early in this, I started taking pictures of this just to show how it progressed, but this is just the layering. Next slide. How it starts taking shape, how the stencils and dripping and different ways of using the masking tape start to create a background and start to create depth in the painting. Next slide. So you can see how some things are painted over and it just goes on and on. The crackling underneath, you can see some of that. Next slide. This is me adding the emphasis to some things and painting on some of my own textures into it. This painting took a long time. Next slide. Again, the background, that's how it looked when I was almost finished. Next slide. And this is how it looked again. This is something Ryan and I did together for our friend Mitch. And he was starting a new job and we were wanting to encourage him. And this was how it looked when we were done. Next slide. Just how it, yeah. And this is, we were using our signatures together. We've changed it since then, but that's just an example. Next slide. The winter. So this picture or painting is talking about that time when in the album, so this goes back to we are co-pilots, and when the person or the subject or Ryan was going through the hardest time of his crisis, this depicts that. So when listening to the songs and listening to the story, this is what happened. I just started painting. Next slide. Next slide. So, oh, can you go back one? Okay, so sometimes when I'm painting, I don't really have a plan, and I just use the music to help me bring out whatever it is. This painting was very frightening as an artist to paint because I didn't really understand what was taking shape, and I was listening to the songs, I was listening to the stories, and this is where when Ryan was very sick, he looked like that. But in his memory, he was that overachiever in the back. And he dreamt of this person, it's in the front with the French braids. He dreamt of this person helping him. And then in the back, there was two spirits that followed him. And he dreamt of those spirits too. So I guess the point is I didn't know any of this when I was painting it. Just the music and the prayer, this is what happened. And when I told you we were going to come back to it, this was what Ryan was pointing to. When he was sitting in the guitar, he's like, wow, how did you know this? And I just didn't. It once, like in painting the bones, there, that is using the 3D, but it was very frightening to me to paint. Next slide. I made this, not everything that I do has a lot of meaning. This was just something fun that I created for my friend Todd. First slide. It's big. I paint on big canvases because I like to, but also because I don't see that well and I kind of am too proud to wear glasses all the time. They give me a headache. So I just paint big. Next slide. I use all kinds of mediums. This one has little glass beads in it and it makes a lot of sparkles underneath those sparkles, you can see the paint, and that is also a stencil. Next slide. Stencils with words, I can use a shading. Next slide. And just some 3D effects in the wings. Next slide. And that's how it looks. So this was a freehand drawing, but when we pulled back, you can see that I used the stencils to shade the outside. And it's not so much that I use the stencils for what's on the stencil, I use it for the textures that it creates. Next slide.
You've hit them all now, Jill.
Pardon?
You've hit them all now.
Oh, great.
I'm going to bring Brian back in.
Sure.
There you go. Just proof that there's a lot of people that pull this all together. You know, each time I hear you speak, Jill, this is your third time.
I absolutely can't hear. Can you put the maybe along the bottom when you have? I have to answer something because I can't hear. I don't know why.
Okay. Well, I'm going to speak a little louder. Can you hear?
Yeah, a little.
Okay. Well, we'll try to work with that. You speak about not being a good drawer, but yet your art is so complicated. There's layer upon layer of it. And when you see some of the earlier images of the art as it's being developed, sometimes the finished product is totally different than what you see at the beginning. So how do you work through that? How do you know what it's going to end up like as far as the final image? Do you know that, or does it just, is it inspired as you paint?
Yeah, I couldn't
hear
it
it
at all.
Okay.
I'm not sure why. It must be like the Wi-Fi where I am that I can't hear. I can see and I can hear it like bubbling like you're underwater. Oh, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure what the difference was there. Okay, so I was just talking about the complexity of your painting, and that one that you did of your trauma, and how different it started out versus what it ended up being. Mm-hmm. Did you know that that's the way it was going to transform as you were painting it, or did it happen as the painting grew?
In that one, I really didn't know how it was going to turn out. I was processing a lot of hurt and anger and sadness, and I knew when it was finished, but I didn't know where it was going.
Okay, all right, that's fair enough. And again, the passion that you speak about is what we're hoping that the students will get out of this, to use some of their personal experiences and to bring that in. And hopefully it's not trauma that they're dealing with, but if it is healing that can happen through art, whether it's through painting, drawing, or through music, use that. What I thought was interesting was how you use it for your own personal healing, and the fact that you actually burn some of your paintings.
Yeah.
So again, for anyone who is experiencing hardship in life, there's some ways that you can deal with it internally, and sometimes that is, as an artist, you get to share that. And the complexity of your stories. Again, I'm just amazed at what I learned from you. But your layering techniques are of interest to me. So there's the layering that you use of the paints that build on each other to get more depth. But then there's just also the layers that you use to create the changes of the imagery. I'm not sure if I'm asking the question correctly, but is that, again, pre-planned, or does it just happen as the painting develops?
What do you mean the changing of the imagery?
So from beginning to end. So it's that layering that is I think an interesting technique. Many people, when they paint or they draw, they create an image and it's there on the canvas. The image that's in the background is my painting. And so that's the way my paintings are. I put it on the canvas and there it is. But for you, it transforms throughout the painting process.
Yeah.
And so again, is that part of what you plan in advance? Or does it just happen as the painting progresses?
Sometimes that I am aware of how many layers I need. I'm aware of the chemical reactions that I need to occur as I'm painting. But that comes from experience, right? So painting without a plan, just painting to feel good, to entertain yourself, or to work through some things, that is the best way to learn how to control your art.
Do you actually sketch out your paintings in advance, or do you do a sketch separate that you use as inspiration, or does it just flow from you?
Both. So
Okay.
this painting behind me with the poppies, this is one that I'm painting to represent my mother and my work with my mother, because that was her favorite flower. I could just put that on canvas and I'll be done this painting today, or I can just start working and have no idea.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're a multi medium type artist and your photography is such a big part, um, what software do you use to manipulate your photographs? Is there a special software?
Yeah, I think it's called like a landscape or Pixscape or something in Apple. I use Apple products only.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So go to the App Store and you'll find it there.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you get the photos actually into your paintings?
I take them, I email them to a printer, and I can print them as big or small as I want, and then I can cut them out or rip them or whatever I need to do with them.
So you actually glue the paintings or the photographs onto the paintings?
Sometimes, or I use a podge.
Okay. So again, looking at what resources you might have at home, if you're watching this at home, or if you're going to do your art at home, to realize that there are different ways that you can end up with a finished product.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have the opportunity, if there are any questions from the audience, to submit them. By all means, put them into the chat section. If not, I also know that we're looking for some students who are actually having to leave a little bit early.
I know.
So with that, Jill, I will say thank you to you for taking the time, sharing your passion, sharing how you transform trauma in your life. And for anyone who knows and understands the Indigenous culture and what has happened to the Indigenous people in this country, you're able to share a number of issues that I'm hoping that the teachers are sharing and talking about with their students. So thank you for that.
Well, I would also like to add that if we're on Facebook, so if somebody wants to send pictures, or I would love to see what people are working on too. I know that they're going to be submitting them to you, but I have a real heart for youth. So.
All right. Well, wonderful. So we'll make sure that happens. So I'll say goodbye to you, Jill, and you and I will talk soon. For everyone else, before you sign off, just a reminder. Listen to Jill's passion. Listen to how she's transformed some trauma in her life and has turned it into beauty, but also has at times burned it to get rid of it. And sometimes that's just what you have to do. But we're hoping that through the Navigating the Waters of Indigenous Art, you'll be inspired by what you heard today. Listen to some of the techniques that she used, or maybe experiment yourself with different techniques that you never thought was possible. I think it's an important feature or characteristic that she spoke about, that she herself is not good at drawing. Too often we look at things and think we have to make it look like that tree, that plant, that animal, and that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you take what you as the artist sees or gets out of that experience and translate that into your art. But whether you're using crayons, whether you're using paints, acrylics, oils, watercolor, felt markers, or pencils, and whether you're using paper or canvas, use what you learned today and create your own piece of art. Navigating the Waters of Indigenous Art. If you need a starting point, think about water. And water is such an important issue for the world, but also within Indigenous culture. And having Jill speak about it today was important. Water is something that the women in our culture are responsible for taking care of. And it's a great honor for women to have that. So to have Jill as one of the speakers is great, but maybe use water as your inspiration, but not necessarily. And create that, take photos of it, send it into the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre, and you'll have a chance for your art to be shown and showcased online that can be viewed right around the world. So great opportunity for you yourselves to get a little notoriety. So I do want to thank the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre for providing the Indigenous community this voice. There are 3 artists, myself included, as being one of them, so I'm honored. And Clayton Samuel King is the 3rd one. So the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre has given us a voice and a platform to bring forward some of the important issues. Jill spoke about the 60s scoop. She spoke about murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse individuals. So this is a wonderful platform that we have had. So teachers, use this as an opportunity to maybe take some of those discussions and to listen to what each of the artists have brought forward as to what has inspired them through their art. For myself, that painting that was in the background, that orange one, that's my painting about Indian residential schools. So again, each of us is using our art as a way of telling the story and using it as an Indigenous voice. So continue those conversations into the classroom, inspire your students to develop and create a piece of art that you can take a photograph of and then share it with the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre, and we'll get you online. So with that, I will say thank you to FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre, to Sarah Palmieri that you saw pop on the screen a few times throughout the broadcast today. And thank you for coming on and giving us this opportunity to share a little bit about our art and what drives us as artists. So, Koa Pemmiton, I will see you all again in the future.